Hello, hello, my brothers and sisters. This is Garrett Baker, your brother in arms, and welcome to another episode of The Tactical Businessman. Today's topic, subway trains. I'm not a young spring, how do they say it? Young chicken? Young spring, whatever, anyway. I don't even know how to say that. Let's just say I'm not young anymore. Not old. I don't consider myself old. However, let's just say I have a lot of life experience. But in this life of mine, these 40 plus years, I've had the opportunity to travel to multiple locations across the world. And during my travels, I've experienced multiple subways, light rails, train systems, if you will, in South America, in Australia, in the United States, Central America. I mean, all over the place. So I've experienced a lot of these different systems, and they all serve one purpose and one purpose only, and that is taking people from one location to another quickly and efficiently. Some places more efficiently than others, but that's their purpose. This last winter, my family and I spent a week in New York City, and if you've ever had the opportunity to be in Manhattan and ride the light rail or the subway system, you know that it can get confusing at times. Even with an app, I had my phone. I had a clear direction that I was going in, but wouldn't you know that the first train I got on, we went the wrong way. It took a few stops before I realized that. So anyway, but during our visit there, we did most of our traveling through the subways. It's the most efficient, effective way to get around. And during our trips, they have different numbered and lettered trains depending on where it was that you were going. And we were staying in our hotel right next to Grand Central Station, which is absolutely amazing when it comes to the amount of people that come through there and that travel from some of the outer boroughs and other locations, Connecticut, New Jersey, and whatnot, into Grand Central Station to then ultimately get around Manhattan. They say there's over 5 million people that ride some form of transit subway system in New York every single day. So it gets people moving. Well, some of the stations that we went to were older. Some of them were newer. You could tell based on, cleanliness, based on decor, and some other things. But regardless, every time we stepped onto a train, there was a gap between the train and the platform, right? These two places. Now, in New York, they would say something called watch your step, watch your step, be careful. You don't want to fall in there. There have been people that have fallen in there and died. And I was curious as to where this, came from. So I started digging around. And there, I came to find that this term is not an original term that was used. In England, their subway system is called the Tube. You ride the Tube, the London Underground, but that's what everybody knows it as, is the Tube. And the stations in London, a lot of their stations are not set up straight, right? In straight lines. They're more curved. But the trains are, in essence, straight, correct? So as a straight train approaches a curved platform, there's a gap that's created, right? Some places are close, but as the curve comes around, then there's a gap created. And some of these gaps can be up to 1 and in some places 2 feet wide, which is quite a distance, especially when you're in a hurry, you've got luggage, you've got a kid, whatever it is. So in the early 60s, they used to have people who would stand there and would say something like, stand clear of the doors, be careful, this kind of stuff. And it got to be impractical. Impractical because why? There were so many people riding the Tube, riding the London Underground, that there weren't enough people to be able to tell them to, quote unquote, mind the gap, to watch out for the space between the platform and the train, to watch out for the space from where they were to where it ultimately was that they wanted to go. So they automated this through the system, and they coined this phrase, mind the gap. And they would play this every time a train would arrive and every time that a train would leave. This automated announcement, mind the gap, mind the gap, mind the gap. So it became connected with the tube, with this London Underground system. Now, the same phrase, the same terminology, or something similar is used throughout the world. Europe, Asia, South America, the United States. Watch your step, mind the gap. Some variation of this, mind the distance, is what they say in Germany. So the reason that they say this is because they want people to be careful and not hurt themselves, right? Again, there's a gap between the platform, i.e. where they are, and a gap between the train, i.e. where they want to be, or vice versa, if they're on the train trying to get off. The point is to keep people safe. Now, it's interesting as I was thinking about this while I was in New York, this gap, watch your step, mind the gap kind of thing. And I started thinking about my days on the SWAT team. And what I understood there was the importance of these gaps as well. So if you're unfamiliar with police tactics, military tactics, when it comes into clearing a structure, i.e. making sure that it's safe, there's not any bad guys in there or any harm or danger, they have certain techniques that they use to what we call clear the structure or to make sure that it's safe. And when they go in to clear a room, right, there's usually one person that goes one way, one person that goes the other, one person that comes through the middle. In other words, it's these techniques of what's called room domination. And on these techniques, what is most important is this idea of making sure that there's no space or distance between you and the person behind you, or you and the person in front of you. Why? Well, think about this. When you're going into an unknown space, like say a room or a house or whatever, and your buddy turns left, if he immediately turns left at the doorway, what's exposed? Well, it's his back. So if there was a bad guy to the right, the bad guy could shoot and your partner wouldn't have a chance because he would have his back turned to this bad guy. So what we were taught during first, the police academy, then more in depth when I was on SWAT, what we were taught was to make sure that we were close, that we were tight, that there wasn't a gap between us. Why? Because if my partner went left and then I immediately went right, he would have my back. He'd be able to take care of me, but I would also have his, and I would be able to take care of him. And so this room domination technique is really what the military uses and most police departments use to make sure that when they do have to go into a structure to find a bad guy, to make sure that it's safe, that there's no threat inside, that they're doing it in the most safe and effective way possible. Sure, could one guy go into the room and just run through the house? Yeah, absolutely. But it's not the most safe and effective way possible. The likelihood of him getting hurt is through the roof. Now, what do mind the gap, in my experience on the SWAT team, have anything to do with you in your life? Have anything to do with you in your business? Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's what we're going to talk about. So first, I want to talk about your personal life, and I want to talk about your relationship with your significant other. When you think about this, there's a gap right now between where it is that you are and where it is that you want to be, or what it is that you currently have and what it is that you currently want. Like there's a gap there. And if you're not paying attention to that gap, if you're not constantly trying to close that gap, what's going to happen? Well, in the case of the subway system, you're going to fall through the holes and you might, twist your ankle, you might break your leg, something bad might happen. Or if the gap's wide enough, you might actually fall underneath the train. In the case of the SWAT team, if there's a gap and it's too big, well, when your partner, i.e. your significant other, turns left, there's not going to be anybody watching their back, taking care of them, protecting them, and they're going to get hurt. So there's a real importance to make sure that in your life you're minding the gap, that you're paying attention to the space between where it is that you are and where it is that you want to be. And what are we constantly trying to do? We're constantly trying to not only pay attention to it, but to make it as small as possible. The smaller the gap, the closer together we are, the less likely that what? That something bad is going to happen. The less likely that someone's going to get hurt. Now, when this applies to your business, think of it this way. Think of it between the gap of what it is that you want and what it is that you currently have. And I don't just mean financially. So where are you at right now when it comes to your marketing? What is it that you really want? Where is it right now when it comes to your sales? And what is it that you ultimately want? Where is it that you are right now when it comes to your systems? What is it that you ultimately want? Where is it that you are right now when it comes to your culture? And what is it that you ultimately want? So there's a gap between where you are and what it is that you want. And if you're not paying attention to the gap, if you're not constantly trying to close this gap, if you're not trying to constantly decrease your exposure, what's happening? Well, you've got people that are falling in the cracks and hurting themselves. You got people that are turning their backs and they're getting shot. You've got all these things that are happening around your business that ultimately, if you were to pay more attention to this gap and the closing those gaps, then these things wouldn't be happening. Now, this is interesting enough because I've experienced a lot of this when it comes to my business, when it comes to what it is that I do. And I realize that the desire for something is not enough if I'm not aware of where it is that I am right now. So there's always going to be a gap. The only question is how wide is that gap? And what are you doing to close the distance? What are you doing to make it safer? What are you doing to make sure that people don't ultimately get hurt, right? So I had to examine what it was, the message that I was relaying to my audience, right? If you're in any type of business, then sales is part of your process. It is. That's just the way it is. So if you're a business person and you're in the space of sales, you ultimately want to acquire more customers. So the question you have to ask yourself is, what am I doing to close the gap between what it is that I have to offer and what it is that my customers ultimately want? And what's the best way to do that? Well, the best way to do that is to understand where it is that they're at right now. So in the case of England, right, are they on a curved platform? Is there a big gap there? Do you have to speak to them more directly and be like, hey, listen, don't step right here. Or if you do, make sure that you take a really big step. Otherwise, you're going to fall and you're going to hurt yourself. Think about that. When I started to apply this concept of mind the gap in my business, things started to shift for me. Why? Because I was no longer just trying to sell something to someone. I understood that there was a gap between where they are and where they want to be. And that ultimately it was my responsibility to have them pay attention to that gap so that what? So that they don't get hurt. Could be in their relationship, could be with their body, could be in their business. It doesn't matter. So ask yourself right now, in your business or in your personal life, what is the gap between where you are and where you want to be? Where's the gap between where your wife is and where she wants to be? Where's the gap between where your customers are and they want to be? And ultimately, are you doing your job, your responsibility to mind that gap, to tell them to mind that gap, to ultimately close that gap so that they don't get hurt or something bad doesn't happen? Listen, life is not easy. If it was, we'd all be winning, right? But life has some simple concepts. And if we can apply these simple concepts, not only to our personal life, but our professional life, then we'll start to see the results that we want. We'll start to see that this gap starts to close. All right, that is it for today. As always, my brothers and sisters, if you have any questions, reach out to me. Send me a message. Let's talk. If you're having issues closing this gap, if you're not understanding what it is that the difference is between where you are and what you want, or even how to close that gap, that's what I'm here for. Let's have a conversation. Maybe I can give you some tools. Maybe I can give you some tips. Maybe I can give you some techniques that I've used to be able to close this gap. But ultimately, as always, this life is about action, and it's about the actions that you take to get what you want. Remember, the only way to win life is to win the daily war. As always, my brothers and sisters, stay safe, and we'll see you on the next one.